Hey guys, I'm so glad you're here with me today. Today we're going to be telling a story about my sweet son Jacob. I know some of my listeners knew Jacob pretty well and watched him grow up, and he was just such a special kid. And really anybody that you ask would tell you that. I know I'm his mom, so I should be biased and say those things, but truly everyone that knew him was impacted by him in a positive way. And I've never heard of anyone that was impacted by him in a negative way. So it's just sweet. The life he lived was really consecrated to God. And he wasn't a perfect kid. Nobody's perfect, but he lived a very special life. And he had a special relationship with God that impacted every facet of his life. So while there is no such thing as a perfect child, Jacob was just a gift. He was a gift to everybody that was around him. So it is my special honor today to get to bring you stories about Jacob. And I hope you'll stick with me through this because it's really about the story of his life and the hand of God on his life. So hang in there with me. It's going to be a great day. So where this story begins is a mobile home in College Station, Texas. I was 20 years old and I had a job working for Texas A&M University, and I had been at school at Texas A&M as a student. And so I was working for the university and living in a mobile home, and it had AC, but it was really like just the main living room would get cool, and then both ends of the mobile home would just get super hot. And we live in Texas. And I went to sleep one night, and during the night I had a dream. And in this dream, I was nursing a baby boy, and kind of dirty blonde hair. Probably, if I had to guess, the baby was probably about 8 or 9 months old in my dream. And it was really vivid. And I woke up that next morning and I was like, my goodness, that was such a wild dream. It had just been so vivid. It made me start considering some things. And I was like, man, I need to go find out, what if I really am pregnant? So that day I went to work, and on my lunch break, I went over to, as an employee, we could go to a health clinic there on campus. And so I went over to the health clinic to have my blood drawn. It was free. And I got the results back, and they called me and they said, it's positive. And I literally said, positive I am or positive I'm not? Like, I just wasn't sure. Like, what in the world? My whole life was changing, and I really couldn't believe it. But I was so excited because I'd always wanted to be a wife and I'd always wanted to be a mom. Probably the thing I looked forward to the most in life was being a mom. And I think in part that's because I had such an incredible mom, and I am so blessed, because I know that isn't everybody's stories. But my story is that I had an incredible mom. The thing I looked forward to the most in life was having a family of my own, having children. I couldn't believe it, and I was just beside myself. Well, that was a really cool way to find out I was pregnant. At that point, we weren't really in church or anything. I had wanted to go to church some, but I wasn't willing to go alone, and that would have been the circumstances I would have needed to go under. And so I just hadn't been going. And I still had a very vibrant relationship with God as far as my prayer life. I prayed a lot. I talked to God a lot. I believed in God. There was no lack of belief. I just wasn't walking out faith. I wasn't involved in a fellowship. And it was really detrimental to my health at that point, because I didn't have any close friends or anybody I could talk to about important life things. My mom passed away when I was 17, and I had only been 17 2 weeks when she passed away. So I was barely 17, and I just didn't have anyone in my life to talk to about spiritual things or even really concerns, worries that I had. And so that's where I was. And I woke up that day, took that test, couldn't believe it, was so excited, but at the same time, a bit overwhelmed because we were broke. I mean, we lived in that mobile home, we rented it, and we rented a mobile home because it was the cheapest thing we could find, and we just weren't making a lot of money. And so I was scared, but I was also more excited than I had been really about any other thing in my life. So I'm not really sure exactly when, but within a few months, I had a second dream. And I knew it was the Lord that had told me I was pregnant. Like that, I just know that that's the way the Lord speaks to me sometimes. And I don't often get visions or dreams or things like that. But I'll tell you, every time I have, it has been really super special. And I had another dream, and I hadn't asked for another dream. I just went to bed one night and had a dream. And then I woke up the next morning. And again, it was so vivid, the impression that was in my heart. And God really told me, this child inside of you, I knew it was a boy. First of all, the first dream I had was of a little boy. And so I was pretty sure it was going to be a boy. And then in the dream, the Lord told me very specifically, the son in your womb, he belongs to me. And he will follow me. Like, he was very clear, he will follow me. And like I said, we weren't in church at that time. And so I was like, okay. And the impression I left with was, whether or not you continue to follow me in your life, this son in your womb will be mine, and he's consecrated to me, and he will follow me. So it's very humbling, like, oh gosh, I kind of need to get it together for the sake of this child, but also because I don't want him to love God in spite of the relationship that I had with God at that point in my life. And so it was really important to me to get involved in a church. And my husband did not really feel the same way. He did not care to be involved in church, but when I told him I was going, basically with or without him, at that point, it gave me the courage to say, I'm going to be in church and I'm going to raise our child in church. And that's very important to me. And so he would end up going with me most Sundays to church. And we found this little church. I prayed a lot about it. We visited a lot of churches. We have some great churches in our town. There's just churches everywhere. But we found a little church that was brand new, meeting in a school. And we didn't find that church until my son was actually already born and maybe about 9 or 10 months old. And anyway, they met in a school, and I had not left my son really with anyone because my sister lived in Dallas, so she couldn't be nearby. And I didn't really have very many friends at that time in my life. And so I had very rarely gotten a babysitter or found anyone to leave my son with. I just didn't leave him. I was with him all the time. And so when we went to this church that met in a school, the school would let us use their building, but they would not let us use their classrooms. The nursery was actually out in the hallway outside the classrooms. The sanctuary was, I think, the cafeteria of the school. And so here we were sitting in the cafeteria, and you could hear everything that was going on in the nursery because there was just a thin set of doors that blocked off, the hallway from the auditorium where we were. And so I could hear him, and he would cry, and he was so stubborn and so strong-willed, and he would cry the entire service. So for 45 minutes straight, he would be crying, and I could hear him in the nursery. So we'd be sitting listening to the sermon, and you could hear the kids, whether they were happy or not, in the nursery. But Jacob was not happy because he just wanted to be with me. And I had trained him to be that way because I'd never left him with anyone. So he was only used to me. And he was a difficult baby anyway. He was very strong-willed as a child. And so he knew what he wanted, and he would cry until he got it, really. And I just didn't, I had babysat tons in my life, but I had never had a child. And so it was just very different. And so he cried a good bit in the nursery, and it was the sweetest gift to me. One of the ladies, her name was Jackie, that stayed in the nursery with the kids, and she just loved babies so much. And she told me she knew I desperately needed church. I needed sermons and help. And so she would tell me, it's okay if he cries the entire time. I have him, and you don't have to come pick him up. And it's not stressing me out. Just go and listen to the service. It took me a little while to get okay with hearing him just cry for 45 minutes, but I knew he was safe, and I knew that she was holding him and loving on him. And if she wasn't going to be stressed out about it, then I chose not to be stressed out about it. And so it was more difficult to do than I could, I could sit here and tell you it was easy. It wasn't easy, but I was able to do it. And then sure enough, within about, 3 to 5 weeks, he got used to being there, and he got used to being with Miss Jackie, and he stopped. And those weeks were difficult, but once he finally stopped, it was really nice to be able to sit in a service and know that he was actually having fun. And it was just good. It was a sweet, sweet gift that Miss Jackie gave me as a young mom, very overwhelmed by life. And so that was a really good gift. And we got involved in that church, and the people at that church became our dearest friends. I mean, it was just really like an Acts chapter 2, verse 42 church. We just loved one another. We met together all the time. We broke bread in each other's homes. We were invested, really invested in each other's lives. And that's one of the things that's so sad about cell phones and all the things that we have today. We're so busy. We're always busy. And we're so busy, we rarely have time to invest in each other's lives. And I just think it's a travesty, because the reason we were close was because we looked after one another and we loved one another and we spent time with one another. There's a part of me that wishes we could just go back to those days, because we weren't always accessible. So you had to be very intentional. You would see them at church, you would make a plan, and then you would just show up when you said you were going to show up. And now we've got so many things to do, and people can get a hold of us 24 hours a day. It's like we're more connected than we've ever been as far as people being able to reach us, but we are less connected at a level of depth that instills life into one another. And so I won't get off on my soapbox about all that today, but it was just a different time. It was a different time in the church. It was a different time in life. And it was beautiful. It was really beautiful. And so we just love that church family so much. And still to this day are friends with many of the people that were there. I feel like they probably know me better than, a lot of people have known me in my life, because we were just so close. We got to know one another's hearts. And so it was just a sweet time and a sweet fellowship. And so Jake was raised in church, and he was raised in Awanas and around people that really loved him and really loved God, which was a gift. It was a sweet time in our lives at that point. And I had always worked since I was 15. So my first job was at a grocery store, and I worked at that grocery store until I guess I was recruited to go work at, I don't know how I ended up there, but I worked at a grocery store, and then I went to Eckerd. It was just like a pharmacy, like Walgreens. And I was working at Eckerd's for quite a while. And right next door was a Bell's, the clothing store. And the lady from the Bell's came over and recruited me to work at Bell's, which kind of made my manager at Eckerd's mad, because I cut my hours. But I was actually working both jobs. I didn't quit Eckerd's for quite a while. And I loved it. I loved working in retail. I did pretty well for myself there, and I really enjoyed it. I loved the people, I loved the clothes, and I met one of my dearest friends in my life at that point, and she and I just loved working together, and we were goofy together. And anyway, just special, precious time in my teenage life. But I had done so many things. By the time that I was 20, I had worked for A&M. I had worked at a chiropractic office. I had worked at an insurance agency. I had worked at The Chicken, which is well known in Bryan College Station area, a bar and grill, basically really near campus. And I had also, since I was a child, since I was probably 12, I had babysat and nannied children. And so really loved that job, had really loved working with kids. So when I got done working at The Chicken, I started working in a daycare. I was working at the university, but I had previously worked at a daycare center. And the owners of that daycare center ended up calling me and asking me if I wanted to buy the daycare from them, which was just kind of shocking as a 20-year-old thinking about owning my own business. But I thought, why not? Because I loved the idea of owning my own business, and I had always loved children. And so we just went over the numbers, and the Lord, that's a whole different God story, but the Lord worked it out where we were actually able to purchase the daycare. So it was crazy, because by the time I was 21, I was a business owner, and I had a son, a small child. So the good news was he could go with me to work every day, and it was beautiful. It was such a fun time, and the Lord did so many things, just really a lot of beautiful things in that season where I could be with my son, and at the same time, it was a good income for our family. And it was just such a sweet provision. So we're rocking and rolling. We're in church, and I am loving being in church again. I can't get enough of it. We're there Sunday mornings. We're there Wednesday nights. We're there Sunday nights. Just every time there was a meeting, we showed up. And we were so blessed to be in that season, in that church. So fast forward, I guess, so Jacob is about 7 at this point, and Madeline would have been 4, and then we had another son, Jared, born in 2002, so he would have been about 2, and had 3 small kids, but Jacob was in school, and Maddie and Jared were still going with me to the daycare. And around that time, it was in 2004, the movie The Passion of the Christ came out. And I was sitting watching that movie, and man, I mean, it is such an incredible film. It is really difficult to watch. It is not an easy film to watch, but it is such a good film. It really brings to life the reality of what Christ walked through. And I'll never forget, I was sitting and watching that movie, and I mean, sobbing and just watching that movie. And there is a certain scene where Jesus is on his way to Golgotha, and he is carrying the cross. They've made him put the cross on his back, and he's carrying the cross up that hill to Golgotha, and it's kind of a dirt, gravelly road that he's going up. And at the same time he's going up, it shows him collapsing under the weight of that cross and falling down. And at the same time, it clips over to a scene of Mary, and Mary's kind of running up the streets parallel to where Jesus is walking, and she's looking for him and looking for him. And she's flashing back to when he was a little boy, 3 or 4 years old, when he fell down and scraped his knee. And you just see her flashback thinking about him and running over and scooping him up to love him as his mom and take care of him when he hurt his knee. And the imagery is just very powerful. As you are watching Jesus, he had to carry this alone. Mary couldn't carry the burden of the cross with him. And so you just see all of this happening. And as I'm watching, the Spirit said very clearly into my heart, and a sword will pierce your heart as well. And at the time, I understood God's voice, and it was so clear what he said. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt he was talking about Jacob, but I just didn't know what it meant. So I treasured that in my heart. I held that in my heart, and I said, okay, God. And I assumed what it meant was he was going to have a life where he was misunderstood. I got a glimpse of this when he was in first grade. Jacob was not the most uncommon name, and he was in school, and I got a call from the principal, and they said that Jake was in detention, and that he had called one of his classmates a bad name. And I just thought, there's no way. Like my son doesn't call anyone a bad name. He had the sweetest spirit, and he just loved people really well. And so he was kind of a class clown. He was a little bit of a cut up, but he did not call people a bad name. He wouldn't have, the name they said he had called someone, he had never even heard that word. I was certain of it. And so it was interesting. And I was like, well, are you sure? And whoever I was speaking to, I guess it was the principal at that time. And I got to the school and I started talking to the teacher, and she said, well, he said he did it. And at first he was saying he didn't do it. But then, he finally broke down and said that he did do it. And I was just like, what is going on? It just didn't make sense to me as a mom, because I knew my son pretty well. And so I just took him and I started talking to him, and he was like, I was like, what made you do that? How did you even know that word? And at first he kind of tried to go along with the story that he did it. And then he was like, look, Mom, I didn't do this. I didn't know that word. I've never called anybody this name. I don't understand what's happened. And And he was like, I tried to tell my teacher, but she just wouldn't believe me because the kid kept saying, Jacob did this, Jacob did this. And I was like, okay, buddy, like you don't ever need to take ownership of something that you didn't do. If you've done something wrong, of course, you need to fess up and say, yes, I did it. And you need to be honest and tell the truth. But if you didn't do something by pretending that you did, just accepting what somebody else is telling you you did, even when you didn't, that's not the right thing to do, because there's an accountability missing there. And so never own up to something that you didn't actually do. And so we were talking about that. And so then I end up, all of this, I just took him out of school because he was devastated. He was so upset. I was upset. I was very confused. And so we just went for a drive, and that's when all of this came out. And so then I went back up to the school, and I was like, I need to talk to the teacher again about this. Well, by the time I got to the school, the teacher came to me and she said, I am so sorry. It wasn't your Jacob that said it. Apparently this had happened in a restroom. My Jacob was in the restroom. Another Jacob was in the restroom, and he was the one that had called this child a name, and the child went and told the teacher. And so when I guess somehow the child who had been called a name said that Jacob isn't the one that did it. It was this other Jacob. And so that by the time we got back to the school, that had all happened, and it had all come out that he had been falsely accused and that he hadn't been the one that did it, and all of the things. And so it ended up panning out. But when the Lord said that to me, I kind of assumed that maybe this kind of misunderstanding would just be a normal activity. It was the only baseline I had to go on, because that had just happened, 6 months, less than a year before that had happened. And so I was kind of thinking, okay, this will happen again. And potentially maybe the Lord's going to call him to be a missionary. Maybe he's going to go overseas. Maybe he's going to be abused or tortured for his faith. And I just kind of assumed it would be that. When the Lord said that to my heart, I really just assumed the call on Jacob's life was going to put him in danger, and that I was going to watch him suffer, because that really grieved me as his mom. It was a small incident, but to have your son accused of something he didn't do, watch him cave under the pressure of it, accept that, say that he did do it when he hadn't, it was just really hard for me as his mom, because he was just such a good kid. And so that had all happened, and I just assumed that that was going to happen more often. And I accepted it, and I told the Lord, okay, and we just went on. We just went on with life. And it was so interesting, because as I think back to these, I would call them little precious promises that the Lord had made me, I really saw the hand of the Lord on my son's life. I mean, until he was 4, he was very stubborn, and he got disciplined a lot because he was just a stubborn, strong-willed kid. And so, he would do things, and I would tell him not to do them, and he would get in trouble, and then he would do them again. And so he had a little streak in him of stubbornness that we had to really train. But by the time he turned 4 years old, all of a sudden, I got back this little kid that was extremely obedient and just a joy. He was just a joy. And he loved his little sister well, and he loved his little brother well. He was an excellent big brother, a wonderful son, and just a good kid. And so I remember, at 11, and I would just tell people that, we would be talking, and I was like, oh, Jacob, he's just such a good kid, and he's so obedient. And I would be talking about him like, well, just give him another year. Wait till those hormones hit, and you'll see he's going to become this whatever. And it was crazy, because I heard it so many times. Just wait till he's 12. Just wait till he's 13. And he never grew into that rebellious teenage kid that everybody was warning me I was going to have, this kid with attitude. He just didn't do that. He was obedient, and he was a good kid. And he was a blessing to his teachers. He was a blessing to the students around him. He was just an excellent kid and such a great big brother. But I remember he was 11 or 12 years old, and my husband and I had gone on a date night, and we had left him in charge. He was probably 12. If we left him in charge, his sister would have been 9, and his brother would have been 7. And so we left the 3 of them, and we're at dinner, and he calls, and he's so upset. He's sobbing. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What's going on, Jake? I was so mean to Madeline. I was so mean to her. And she made me so angry. And I tackled her in the backyard. I guess they were playing a game in the backyard. And he was just sobbing. And I was like, well, have you told her that you're sorry? And he said, yes, I've told her that I'm sorry. And I'm just such a bad brother. And I'm just so sorry. I should have never done it. And so I said, well, is everybody okay? Is everything? And he said, yes. And so we finished dinner, and then we went home and, talked with him about that, talked with her about that, made sure everything was good. And then I want to say it was that same year, he ended up going to a youth camp with our church. And I would have never known this except for one of the leaders that was at the camp told me. And she said, Christy, after the speaker one evening, Jacob went off and he was by himself and he was just out and he was looking up at the sky and with stars and he was just sobbing. And the Lord had really convicted his heart about what kind of a brother he was to his sister at that time. And, it's interesting because I've never even talked to my daughter about this. From what I know, he was always so good to her, and they were so close. They were such good friends that I would love to, I need to do that. I'm going to talk to her about what kind of a brother he was when she was younger, 9, 10 years old. But the Lord had really convicted him, and this leader was able to go and talk to him and pray with him about it. And, he came back from that youth trip, and the Lord just had a hold of his heart. And I found out later that they called him Mac on that trip, which at first I was like, Mac? I was thinking, Mac Daddy, what? I don't like that. And they were like, no, man after Christ. And all of the guys and the kids on that trip just really had said so many wonderful, positive things about Jacob and the leader he was for Christ. And that was not a surprise to me because God had told me before he was ever born, God had told me that that's who he was going to be and that he would be consecrated to God and a friend of God. And he really was. He was a friend to God. And it's really unbelievable as I think about it, just the honor it has been and was to be his mama. And God could have given him to anybody. And so I treasure all of this in my heart that the Lord gave him to me. And the Lord foretold these things to me to prepare my heart for the days that would come. And so as he got older, again, he just continued to grow into this kid. I was so proud of him. I got a note from the principal one time when he was in high school. And, I don't know how many times you've ever gotten a note from the principal about one of your kids, but typically when you get a note from the principal, it's not about what a good kid you have. But that was exactly the note I got. The principal just wanted to send me a note to let me know that she had seen Jake go into the counselor's office and he was taking her trash out. I think the counselor was not there at that moment. And so, the principal comes in and this kid is just taking out the garbage. And she said, "What you doing?" And he said, I saw the garbage just needed taking out, so I decided to do it for her. And she was like, "Man, that's really nice. Thanks for doing that." And she wrote me a note about it because he was just such a special kid. Even the adults, the teachers in his life had taken notice. And so he was so funny too. He was a funny kid. And he would tap his pencil a lot, and he had a hard time staying focused and listening. And so he tapped his pencil a lot, and he always had music in his head and in his mind, and he's just a great kid. So fast forward, and now he's in high school. He's 15 years old, and he and his best friend used to walk to school every day, and his best friend had some cousins that lived nearby as well. And so they all would walk to school together every morning. They would meet up and walk up to the school because it wasn't very far from our house. And so they did that. They walked together every day to school and from school. And this one particular day, he was running really late for school. He had woken up late, and I was not a very structured mom. I have some dear friends that are very structured, and they are very good about making sure their kids get out of the house and they've brushed their teeth and they've had a good breakfast and all this. That was not me. I was the mom that I would make them food and I would try to get them to brush their teeth, but those were not the things. Like for me, it was just trying to get everybody. I was not scheduled, and so trying to get everybody out the door was quite an ordeal. And Jake was old enough that he would get himself out the door, and he loved schedule, and he was wired that way. In fact, when he was young, when he was probably 3 and 4 years old, we'd be driving, and I would say, "Hey, buddy, we're going to go to the bank and to Walmart and then to the grocery store." And he would say, "Okay." And then we'd head out, and I would get to Walmart, and he'd be like, "Mom, you said we were going to go to the bank and then Walmart and then the grocery store." And so for him, that structure was really important, which was another thing I didn't know when he was a baby. That probably did not help make him a very calm child, because I wasn't on a schedule or a regimen. I was just doing life as it came. And so he taught me a lot about having a schedule. And so he's 15 and he bounces out the door and he is late for school. And so I had made him waffles, but he didn't even get to eat them because he was so late. And so at that point, cell phones were out. And so I had texted him. I was like, "Sorry that I forgot your waffles, buddy." And he was like, "That's okay." And at the time, it was really interesting because, there's these phrases and these things that happen as you go through life, different seasons, different eras, you're going to hear different catchphrases. And at that time, that phrase, calm down, it's fine, calm down, it's fine, was a really big phrase. And so Jacob was never disrespectful to me, but sometimes I'd be like, "Hey, buddy, did you get your coat? It's pretty cold out there." And he'd be like, "Calm down, Mom, calm down, I've got my coat," And so he would just joke with me, and we would always joke. And I would text him while he was at school, and I would tell him stuff that was funny, or he would tell me stuff that was funny. And it was just, he would be like, "Calm down, Mom. It's okay. I didn't have my waffles." And so he had gone that morning, and later that afternoon, I get a phone call from the school, and I actually didn't get it. I was at my office, but my phone was on silent, and so I didn't get the phone call, but my emergency contacts actually worked next door to me. And so my emergency contact came over to the place I worked and told me the school's just called and Jacob collapsed during recess and they are doing CPR. And I was just in shock. He wasn't sick. There wasn't anything wrong with him. And so that news was just really, I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know what to do with it. And that morning, I was at work, and I worked for a nonprofit organization, so I was able to listen to Christian music while I was at work. And so a dear friend of mine, had sent me 2 songs that she loved, and she knew worship music is my love language, and so she just sent me these worship songs. And I had put them on that morning, and I had played those 2 songs on repeat over and over and over. It was just those 2 songs, and I played them over and over and over again all morning. So for hours, I had listened to those 2 songs, and they were very peaceful. One of them was called Homeward Bound, and Kristen Mueller is the artist that sings it, and the other is called Trust. And so those 2 songs were on repeat all day for me. And so I was standing there, that song, playing in the background, and I told my boss, I've got to go to the hospital. And I briefly told him what was going on, what I knew, which wasn't much. And I jumped in my car and I drove really fast. I wasn't too far from the hospital, drove really fast. And on the way I was driving, it was interesting. I didn't catch a lot of people on the phone, but I called my sister and I called my best friend and I called my dad and I called a few people, and I just asking them, I don't know what's going on, but Jake collapsed and they're doing CPR. And I was saying the words, "Pray for his life. Please pray for his life." And I've already shared this in another video, but they wouldn't let me back right away to go see him. And I understand, now looking back, as far as they were concerned, he was gone. And they for better or worse, needed to cover themselves, make sure there was nothing else that they could do. So they were talking to, the people who were at school. He collapsed in the gym in front of all of his friends playing dodgeball. And his coach tried to resuscitate him and could not, with CPR and even a defibrillator. They did everything. They did everything that they could to bring him back, but they just couldn't. So the ambulance got there and they continued CPR. And so, again, I've already shared this in the episode Disappointed by God, but I walked back. As I'm walking back to the room, finally, when they were going to let me go back, I'm praying all the way there. And I see him and I see his body, and it's very clear that he's lifeless. They're still doing CPR. And I'm just praying. I'm just praying and praying that God will restore him to life. And in that moment, the Lord just let me know. It was a knowing. I didn't hear a voice. There was just a knowing. I'm not going to do it that way. I'm not going to do it that way. And at that very instant, it was literally like a warm oil poured down over my head. But it was not just like on the outside. It was actually, I felt it on the outside, but on the inside, all the way down, there was this warmth that went down literally into my soul. And it was just a blanket of peace. And I've never felt anything like that before. And to be fair, I had never grieved like that. When I lost my mom, I really grieved. I would ask the Lord every single night. I'd sit at the end of my bed and ask the Lord to take me home to heaven. Didn't want to be here. If my mom wasn't going to be here, I didn't want to be here. And why? Why am I still here if she's not? And so I had grieved like that. But this grief was an even more poignant grief. I had never really loved, until I had Jacob. I loved people, but I was very selfish. And with Jake, it was so easy to not be selfish. And it was the same thing for each one of my children. I just love my children, and the Lord made it easy for me to love them, even to my own detriment, really. I just loved them. So I loved him. And I remember when I was probably about 27, 28 years old, talking to the Lord and just saying, Lord, I want to love you more than anything else. But if I'm honest with you, I don't know how to love you as much as I love Jacob. I didn't know how to love anything or anyone until I loved Jacob like that. And he taught me how to love. And then that love just multiplied when I had Madeline and Jared and Jude and Mia and Cynthia. It's like that love just kept growing. And so I remember talking with God and saying, I want to love you more, but I don't know how to love you more than my kids. And help me love you more than that. And so at that time in my life, again, this is a different story, but the Lord took me through something really hard that helped teach me that I did love him more. And boy, it was something to walk through, but it was so beautiful on the other side of it to realize that truly now my heart belonged to God more than any other person or thing. So sitting there, as he gave me that understanding that he was not going to heal my boy, that my boy was not going to come back and not sit up on that table, I just, again, it's like the oil came and that warmth came, and as it came, it was like I just fell to my knees and said to the Lord, Jesus, he belongs to you. He belongs to you. He had told me from before he was born that Jacob belonged to him, not to me. And so one of my daughters had had multiple seizures, which gave her the title of epileptic. And there were tests and things that we did to try to figure out where they were coming from and why she was having these seizures. And it was very scary. And so in my journal, I was just talking to the Lord about it. And I had told him, my kids are yours. They belong to you, not to me. And they're just on loan. And I even wrote a blog post. I had written a blog post about how my children belong to the Lord, and I have to trust that his will over their lives is the best will. And so I had just written a blog post about that a few weeks before. I'm standing there in this hospital with my son, who God had told me years before he was ever born, when he was still in my womb, God told me that Jacob belonged to him. And here it was, staring me right in the face. Do I really believe that? And the Lord gave me the grace to say, yes, he belongs to you. He's always been yours. He's always belonged to you. And we each had our moment. My ex-husband and I each had our moment just alone with Jake. And when I was there with him, we don't know exactly what happens. I've heard a lot of stories about near-death experiences, and people say that they're there, in the room, kind of hovering above before they go up to heaven. And I don't know I don't know what was going on with Jake at that time, but I just talked to him like he was there, able to hear. And I told him I was upset because it was always supposed to be me that went first. I was jealous that he was already in the presence of Jesus, and dadgum, that I was just so sad that it was him and not me. And, in that moment, it was like I could hear his little voice, calm down, Mom, calm down. And I know that that's what he would have been telling me. I'm fine. Calm down, Mom. And so I just held all of that in my heart. And, the months that came after, the days, the weeks, the months, it was impossible to get sleep. Every time you wake up, it is right there in your face again, that this one that you loved is no longer there. And it really is just like a nightmare every single day. You just wake up and you wish it was a nightmare. You wish you could wake up from the bad dream, but you realize it's real. And the bad part about it is not for Jacob. He's in heaven with God. He is living more alive than we're living right here, right now on the earth. We feel like this is life, but the Bible tells us this is the shadow. We are living in the shadow of the things to come. And every desire we have in our heart, the desire to be loved, the desire to be fully known, the desire to be fully known and yet still loved, the desire to do the big dreams that the Lord has put in our hearts, the desire to not be sick and to not be sad, all of these things, we are living in the shadow. Those are all reality in heaven. And so my boy is no longer sick and he is no longer sad. He is living true abundance and true life. But the sadness that was with me every day was because his absence was so powerfully felt. He was joy every day, just brought us joy and laughter. He was an excellent son. He was tall, so he was almost 6 foot tall at 15. He was 5'11" and a little. And he could reach everything. So all the top cabinets where I couldn't reach, he would reach. And that was actually one of the saddest things afterwards, was having to go to the store and buy a stepladder because nobody in the house could reach anything anymore. And we just missed him every single day. But it was such a gift to me that the Lord told me before he was born, I knew that boy belonged to God. God loved that boy more than I ever could. And what a privilege it was to get to be his mama for 15 years. There's just What an honor to be a mom. And so I just wanted to share that with you today. I have 1,000 stories about Jake where he just made people's day better. There was a girl, apparently he was tall, but he had the bottom locker, and a shorter girl had the top locker at his school, at his high school. And so every day he would go and he would like get her pencil out of her locker for her, or he would get her down a folder and hand it to her. And so it just became the thing where he just would get her stuff for her every day. And they didn't know each other outside of those little interactions, but those were the interactions. And after he passed, the school actually sent me an entire folder of letters from other students and teachers that were all about Jacob and how I didn't really know him, but he let me borrow a pencil once, or I didn't really know him, but he always helped other people with their math homework, or I wasn't the best friend of his, but he always smiled at me and made my day better, or always joked and made everyone laugh. And so, it was really hard for the kids and the teachers at the school. His life made an imprint on the people around him. And, it wasn't because Jake was a good kid. It was because Jake loved God and served Jesus in the things that he did. And it was so evident the life he lived was because he was living as a boy who was chasing after God. And it's something, it's crazy that he was my son, and yet he's a role model for me. That's what I want my life to be about. I want my life to be that everywhere I go, everyone I talk to, when I come into the room, the kingdom comes with me. That's peace and love and joy and all of the fruits of the Spirit. I want to live that way because my boy lived that way, and his life had a major impact. And so today, that's my encouragement to you is love like Jake, live like Jake, smile like Jake, give people something beyond yourself. And the only way that you can really do that is to love the way God loves. And we sure can't do that unless we've received the love that God has for us. And so today I exhort you to spend some time just thinking about the fact that when God knit you together in your mother's womb, he had a purpose for you too. And it's no less than the purpose he had for my son. He's so intentional with us. And when he creates us, his plan for us is good. So look at your life and the impact that you're having, and any place that you don't like it. Don't live a life of regrets. Make the changes now. Start doing the things now to impact the world for good. And you can do that. And the Lord has called you to it. So thanks for being here with me today. Thanks for listening to my stories about my Jacob. It's really some of my favorite stuff to tell stories about my kids and just the beautiful things that the Lord did in my life through my kids and involving my kids. And so thanks for sitting with me today. It's been a joy to be here and talk about my Jacob. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week.
Somehow, you love me.